I bought the lake ranch for silence. Not the kind of silence you find in a library or a late-night diner, but the real kind. The kind that hums in your ears after decades of chaos. After 24 years as a fire captain in Houston, I had earned this land, this peace, and every last pine needle that fell on my dock. Magnolia Lake shimmered like glass most mornings, reflecting the sky and my quiet new life. My property sat slightly elevated, with 20 acres sloping down to a wide stretch of private shoreline. I'd restored the old log cabin myself, hand-sanded beams, replaced every rotted plank, and rebuilt the dock with thick cedar. This wasn't just retirement. This was rebirth, but paradise never stays untouched for long. It started with a smile and a clipboard. Welcome to the community. Judith Bellamy had chirped, striding up my gravel drive like she owned it. Late 50s, designer, sunglasses, and a floral blouse, stiff with starch. She introduced herself as the Homeowners Association president and handed me a welcome basket of cookies wrapped in cellophane, along with a thick, stapled rulebook. You'll find everything you need in there, she said, tapping the packet. We like to keep Magnolia Bluffs beautiful and orderly. I thanked her and skimmed the first few pages. Lawn regulations, fence height limits, approved paint colors. Then I saw it. Shared lake access. All HOA members may utilize shoreline areas for recreation. I frowned. This applies to me. Judith's smile tightened. Oh, technically, yes, your lake frontage borders a portion of the community easement zone. It's all explained in Section C, but don't worry, we're very respectful about it. I should have asked more questions then. I should have followed up with the county, but I was still in the honeymoon phase, grateful to be away from sirens and smoke, thinking a few shared kayaks wouldn't kill me. That was my mistake. Within 2 weeks I found 4 teenagers I didn't know swimming in my cove. When I asked where they'd come from, they pointed up the hill. Ms. Bellamy said we could. One of them shrugged, then bombed off my dock like it was a public pool. I let it go. Then Judith's grandson parked his jet ski trailer halfway into my driveway. Let that go too. But when I came back from town one afternoon and found a woman sunbathing on my boat in my fishing kayak, I snapped. I confronted Judith the next day. She didn't deny a thing. Well, if your land borders a shared access zone, that makes a community shoreline, she said, as if reading from scripture. We're all neighbors, Mr. Harlan. It's good to be generous. I informed her politely but firmly that her guests were no longer welcome on my property. I also told her I'd be installing a coded gate at the old service path leading down to the water. My deed, I explained, clearly defined the boundaries. Judith's eyes narrowed, but her tone remained syrupy. Oh, no need for that. We can work this out amicably, I'm sure. I nodded. Great. Then you'll have no problem respecting my boundary. She turned and walked off, her heels clicking like gunfire against my flagstone. The gate went up 2 days later. Steel frame, keypad entry, fresh signage, private property, no trespassing, lake, access restricted. I even posted a copy of my land deed beside it under weatherproof glass, highlighting the parcel lines that proved what I already knew. Property was not part of the HOA's shared access. For 3 glorious days, the lake was mine again. No laughter from strangers, no wet footprints on my dock, no unfamiliar cars winding down my private drive. Then came the letter. It was taped to the gate, flapping in the wind like a warning flag. Official HOA stationery, signed in thick ink. Violation of community shoreline access policy, immediate correction required. Below that, a fine schedule, $150 per day. I stood there in the morning haze, reading and rereading the letter as Max, my old yellow lab, sat quietly at my feet. I'd seen bureaucratic overreach before, but this was different. This wasn't just about a dock or a gate. This was about control. And Judith Bellamy wasn't just an HOA president. She was declaring war. 3 days after Judith's letter appeared on my gate, I received my first official violation notice, certified mail, folded inside a stark white envelope stamped with the Magnolia Bluffs HOA seal. Unlawful obstruction of shared access. It read $150 per day until gate is removed, subject to additional enforcement. It wasn't a suggestion. I knew this wasn't about lake access anymore. It was about Judith's grip on power and how my refusal to bend had threatened it. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling untouched beside the violation. Max rested his head on my boot, sensing the tension that thickened the air. I grabbed my land deed again, spread it across the table, and reviewed every parcel line, every legal footnote. Then I made a call to the county land records office. An hour later, I had confirmation in writing my property, all 20 acres of it, was independently zoned and not governed by the HOA. My land predated the HOA by over a decade. No access, easements, no shared rights, no jurisdiction. I scanned the letter, printed 2 copies, and walked them down to the gate. One I posted beneath the deed. The other I left taped to the HOA's violation notice with a note. Your authority ends at your fence line. Consider this your formal warning. The next morning my mailbox was stuffed with more violation letters. Unauthorized structure on property. improper signage, non-compliant landscaping, bordering community zones, petty, vindictive, manufactured. I ignored the letters. That's when the visitors started. Judith began bringing people dozens out. The hillside trail that ran parallel to the boundary fence. They'd stop just outside the gate, point at the water like tourists, and loudly discuss their shared lake rights. One of them tried to climb over the gate. I caught him with one leg over the top before Max's barking made him scramble back down. That same night, motion lights along the dock flared at 2 a.m. I went out with a flashlight and found footprints in the gravel, fresh ones. I didn't call the sheriff, but I logged everything. I had a binder now, dates, photos, screenshots, incident reports, and I was just getting started. At this point, Judith stopped pretending to be civil. She cornered me in the general store parking lot one morning, just as I was loading dog food into the truck. You think a few signatures on a deed make you untouchable, she hissed. I think the law does, I replied. She leaned in closer, that forced smile gone. You may own the dirt, Mr. Harlan, but I own the neighborhood. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just trying to reclaim access. She was trying to break me. She'd built her empire on control and fear and compliance. And now, here I was, an outsider with legal ground to stand on and no interest in bowing to her rulebook. But what Judith didn't understand was that I wasn't the retiring kind. After 20 years of pulling people from burning buildings, dragging bodies out of floodwaters, and staring down explosions, I wasn't afraid of HOA politics, so I pushed back. I wrote a cease and desist letter, had it notarized and hand-delivered it to the HOA office. I filed a formal complaint with the county about harassment and false citations. Then I called a lawyer, a quiet man named Dennis with a sharp memory and a sharper temper, and retained him to handle any further action. Judith responded by doubling down. She called an emergency HOA meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but I got the minutes from a friendly neighbor who'd had enough of her games. Apparently, she claimed I was undermining community cohesion and threatening legal stability. Legal stability. This wasn't a court case. This was my land. She wanted control. I wanted solitude, and now we were at war. The final spark came 2 days later. A convoy of luxury SUVs rolled up the gravel road like they were arriving at a lakeside resort. Judith's guests, 7 of them, started unloading coolers, beach chairs, and paddleboards at my gate. When I stepped outside and asked them to leave, Judith appeared from the trail like a stage actress hitting her cue. "These are my friends," she said, voice sweet but seething. "We're here for a peaceful lake day. Not on my property." "You're not. You don't get to decide that I own it." Her expression flickered just for a second before she pulled out her phone. "I guess we'll let the sheriff decide." Then she dialed 911 right there on my driveway and told the dispatcher she was being forcibly blocked from accessing community property by an aggressive man with a dog. As Max sat wagging beside me, I realized something. Judith wasn't bluffing anymore. She was escalating, and the cops were already on their way. The sheriff's cruisers arrived 10 minutes later, no sirens. Just the silent strobe of blue lights cutting through the trees. Max stood beside me on the porch, tail still wagging, unaware of the storm rolling in. I'd changed into a clean flannel and jeans, just in case someone tried to twist the narrative. 2 deputies stepped out. The older one scanned the property like a man who'd seen this sort of thing far too often. The younger one kept a hand on his belt, eyes shifting between the gate, the lake, and Judith's entourage, now staged like they were tailgating a neighborhood. Uprising. Deed folder under one arm. "You, Mr. Harlan?" the senior deputy asked. "That's me. We got a report you're blocking community members from legal lake access." "Let me guess," I said, handing over the folder. "Came from Judith Bellamy." He nodded, flipping through the paperwork. "It says she's the HOA president." "She is," I replied. "Of a development I'm not part of." The deputy paused, reading carefully. The property lines were clear. The boundary markers had been recorded decades ago, and the county verification letter was stapled on top. After a minute, he looked up at me and said, "You mind if I take a walk down to the gate?" "Be my guest." We walked side by side, Max trotting ahead. Judith was already in mid-performance by the time we reached her. "This is unacceptable," she barked, storming toward the deputies. "He's illegally fencing off what's clearly designated for community use. We've had shared lake access for years. Do you have any documentation proving that, ma'am?" the deputy asked. Judith blinked. "Well, no, but the HOA's bylaws clearly state we're talking about property ownership," he cut in. "Bylaws don't override legal deeds." The younger deputy stepped up to the gate and pointed at the posted deed and county letter. "This looks pretty airtight," he said. Judith's lips tightened until they nearly disappeared. "Are you saying you're taking his side?" "I'm saying," the older deputy replied, "that unless you can provide legal evidence this land is governed by your HOA, you're trespassing." "Trespassing," she gasped, color rising too, her cheeks. "And if you continue to bring people onto his land without permission, it becomes harassment. We'd rather this stay civil, but we have to enforce the law, not HOA preferences." The word harassment hit her like a slap. "You'll be hearing from our attorneys," She hissed. I already have one, I said calmly. Feel free to loop him in. The guests, sensing the shift, began quietly folding chairs and packing coolers. A few avoided eye contact. One mumbled an apology before climbing back into an SUV. Judith, however, didn't retreat. She stood by the gate, staring at me like I'd desecrated something sacred. I hope you enjoy being the neighborhood villain, she said quietly. I didn't move here to be a villain, I replied. But I won't be your pawn either. She left without another word. Back inside the cabin. I poured myself a drink just one and sat at the window as dusk swallowed the treetops. The lake was calm again, its reflection undisturbed. Max snored at my feet, completely unfazed. The deputies hadn't even taken a statement from me. They'd seen enough, but I knew better than to relax. The HOA had money, Judith had allies, and people like her didn't lose quietly. They regrouped, strategized, and came back swinging with paperwork and pressure. I wouldn't be caught off guard again that night. I emailed Dennis, my lawyer, and forwarded everything. The incident report, the body cam footage request, the citations, and even Judith's HOA meeting minutes from the week before. He replied in under an hour. We're going to make this very uncomfortable for her. Good. Because it was time. Judith Bellamy learned a lesson most people only get once in life. You don't get to rewrite boundaries just because you're used to everyone saying yes. And for the first time since moving to the lake, I didn't just feel like a landowner, I felt like a guardian. 2 weeks passed without another word from Judith or the HOA. No letters, no friendly visits, no random cars loitering at my gate. I'd like to say it was peace, but it wasn't. It was silence before a storm. Judith had been humiliated in front of her followers. She'd called the cops expecting reinforcements and had walked away the defeated general of a failed invasion. I knew she wouldn't take it lying down. The next volley came in the form of a thick envelope from a law firm in town. Cease and desist, HOA, demand for compliance with community lake use policies. They were doubling down. Again, I handed it to Dennis the next morning, and he laughed like it was a punchline. They're bluffing, he said, flipping through the pages, trying to scare you into surrendering access without ever proving jurisdiction. He wrote a formal rebuttal, citing the county's ruling, my deed and state-level property statutes. He didn't just dismiss their claims, he buried them in precedent. A week later, he sent a certified counterletter of his own, a cease and desist directed at the HOA and Judith Bellamy for harassment and attempted trespass. 2 days after that, Judith retaliated with a neighborhood-wide email blast. Lakefront, hostility threatens community spirit. The subject line read, certain residents are obstructing HOA members' long-standing lake privileges. Let's not allow selfishness to poison our shared values. I didn't need to reply. My property and my patients spoke for themselves still. I'd had enough of hiding behind paperwork. I decided to fight her where it would hurt most. In public, I invited every neighbor within half a mile to a Sunday. Barbecue, free food, fishing, music on the dock. I even offered a casting competition for the kids. The one rule, bring your own chair, and don't bring HOA drama. To my surprise, they came. Almost all of them, even some who had previously backed Judith. Turns out her power had always been a performance, something people tolerated out of convenience, not loyalty. But now that her mask had slipped, so had her support. And then came Tommy Nguyen, a quiet man who lived 2 lots over. I'd only waved to him a few times before that day, but during the barbecue he pulled me aside and asked if I'd ever seen the HOA's original founding charter. I've been an attorney for 25 years, he said. Real estate contracts. I smelled something funny after what happened with the cops. He produced a file folder and laid it open on my picnic table. Turns out, the HOA's claim to the shared lake access had never been formally filed with the county. It existed only in their internal paperwork, unenforceable, unofficial, and legally worthless, and better yet, their bylaw claiming jurisdiction over properties like mine had been added years after my land was grandfathered in. No vote, no amendment filing, just inserted quietly by Judith's regime. I had them cold. We filed a complaint with the county board and requested a full audit of HOA practices. Tommy offered to represent other neighbors who'd been harassed or fined under the same false bylaws. One even stepped forward claiming Judith had strong-armed him into paying a fine for a rule that never existed. Momentum shifted fast by the end of the month. A petition to recall Judith as HOA president had racked up over 60% of neighborhood signatures. The vote passed unanimously at a special meeting she didn't bother to attend. She resigned the next morning and had a moving van at her house by nightfall. She didn't say goodbye, just sped down the hill and never looked back. The new HOA board rewrote the bylaws with legal oversight, eliminated the fake citations, and formally recognized my property as outside HOA jurisdiction once and for all. A letter of apology arrived 2 weeks later, signed by every member of the new board. I framed it right next to my deed. Now, when I walk down to my dock in the morning, Max by my side, I don't worry about strangers crossing my gate. I don't look over my shoulder for HOA spies or gate-crashing guests. I cast a line into the still lake, watch the sun burn off the fog, and know one simple truth. Boundaries are worth defending. And sometimes, standing your ground isn't about making noise, it's about refusing to be moved.